Today's video is sponsored by Figure, the largest non-bank home equity loan lender in the US, with over $15 billion unlocked on their lending platform. They're now in the crypto-backed loan space and offering industry-low interest rates when you use your Bitcoin as collateral to get cash. Access interest rates starting at 9.9%, the lowest fixed rate in the industry at 50% LTVs. Whether you're funding a major purchase like a down payment on a home, investing in new opportunities, or even buying more Bitcoin, Figure makes it straightforward and transparent. Visit figure.com/Real Vision or click on my link below to take out a Bitcoin-backed loan with Figure today. Hi, I want to talk to you today about my friends at Bitwise and why they're the best crypto asset manager out there. I've talked on the show often about how crypto is reshaping everything from finance, portfolios, and even macro. Everything's ramping up. We've got tailwinds in DC, interest from TradFi, and growing optimism. But smart investors see all of this and focus on the how. What's the savviest way to seize this moment? And that's why so many investors I know are working with Bitwise today. They've been all in on crypto since 2017. They're OGs. They've got more than 30 products to help investors like you get access to whatever they need or want. They've got a team of more than 100 across the US and Europe, and they have over 10 billion in client assets. You know, a lot of people know Bitwise for their ETFs, how they manage the world's largest crypto index funds and the wide range of crypto ETFs they have. But not as many people realize, Bitwise manages private alpha strategies too, and has SMAs for large investors, and is one of the largest institutional Ethereum staking providers. They really do everything. These guys are true OGs in the space, and they're good friends of mine too. So please go and check out Bitwise. They're really excellent. Go to bitwiseinvestments.com and see all that they've got to offer. That's bitwiseinvestments.com, or just email them at james@bitwiseinvestments.com and let them know that Raoul sent you. Anyway, there's a million ways to access crypto. Explore how you can access it best with Bitwise. And remember, carefully consider the extreme risk associated with crypto before investing. Anyway, thanks so much. Hi, I'm Raoul, and welcome to my show, The Journeyman. The Journeyman, as you know by now, is when I travel on that journey to the nexus of understanding between macro crypto and the exponential age of technology. And I think you've learned that over time, what I'm doing is nudging all of your understandings forward, my own included, as I try and speak to the most interesting people in the world around this whole bigger picture. Because you know what? It's all of our futures, and it's incredibly important. It's also all of our livelihoods as well. While I'm at it, just make sure you do join the channel, because I know you come and watch this a lot, but about 30% of you haven't joined the channel. So just click on the subscribe button here if you're watching this on YouTube. It'll help me greatly. Anyway, let's talk about this interview. This one is with an old friend of mine who has joined the TON Foundation. In fact, is running now the TON Foundation, Manny Stoltz. Manny has a fascinating history. We're both at Goldman Sachs. He has an emerging market, frontier market background. And he's used those principles of understanding of how to understand this new world of digital assets, cryptocurrencies, and these digital network states. And if you know by now, TON is built on top of Telegram, which is one of the largest networks in the world with 1 billion users. So I think it's going to be fascinating to understand, what is he thinking? What are they thinking? Because most blockchains start with no users and an amazing product. This has a network, but we need to get the use of the network to use the TON token. So it's a different problem to solve. And I really want to hear how Manny thinks about it. Anyway, it should be a great conversation. So sit down, get yourself a drink, and let's have a chat with Manny. Join me, Raoul, as I go on a journey of discovery through the macro, crypto, and exponential age landscapes. In The Journeyman, I talk to the smartest people in the world so we can all become smarter together. Manny Stoltz, fantastic to see you on Real Vision.
Good to see you, Raoul.
Yeah, I don't know why we've not done this before, but now it's going to be perfect timing because A, you've got a brilliant story, and B, what you're doing, I think, is going to be a brilliant story as well. So lots to dig into. But firstly, tell us what you're up to now, and then we'll go back in time and find out how the hell you got here.
Yeah, sure. So I guess the reason we're talking is that I've recently become the president of the TON Foundation. TON is the open network. I'm sure people have heard of Telegram, but we are partners with Telegram, the basically second largest messaging app in the Western world and the fastest growing. And I've now basically reluctantly agreed to sacrifice at least a portion of my privacy, and and have to be, I guess, playing a little bit of an ambassadorial or I guess presidential role. This is kind of one of my first sort of on the record interviews, and of course it's a great honor that we can do this together. Losing my virginity on Real Vision.
Fantastic. So tell us your story. How the hell did you get here?
Well, I'll try to keep this short, entertaining, and relevant. The very sort of the 3-minute version is that I grew up in a small town in Black Forest, Germany. I might come back to that town because there's some relevance. There's a good story. Okay. And humble background. Dad was an engineer, mom psychologist. They're academics. Nothing to do with big business or global finance. Middle of 3 brothers. Do with that information what you wish. Let's say I have to defend myself or fight for attention. And I was the sort of entrepreneurial, ambitious, maybe slightly naive, and sort of dreaming middle child, and had 2 goals in life, largely unchanged. The first one was to change the world and make it a better place. And the second was to make a lot of money, and quickly realized each of those is very hard individually, let alone together. So I needed a plan. First part of the plan was to swap the order around, probably the right call. And the second part of the plan was to get some inspiration by people who've done it and done both. And I guess the good news was there are lists for this sort of stuff. And the further good news was that the top spot on both lists, and of course you can debate about, the best KPI for, changing the world and making it a better place, but being the world's biggest philanthropist maybe is not a bad proxy.
Ever wish you could access cash without selling your Bitcoin? Ledn makes that possible. Ledn is the global leader in Bitcoin-backed lending. Since 2018, they've issued over $9 billion in loans, and not a single satoshi of client funds has ever been lost. Here's what makes a Ledn loan different. With a custodied loan, collateral is not lent out to generate interest. There are no credit checks. Funds in less than 12 hours, no monthly payments, and repay whenever you want with 0 penalties. And they just don't talk security, they prove it. Ledn offers proof of reserve reports, verified by a top accounting firm every 6 months. Ledn is 100% focused on doing one thing better than anyone else, giving Bitcoin holders a secure and transparent way to unlock liquidity without selling. Learn more at www.ledn.io.
So the top spot was the same person. Good news, not mutually exclusive. The bad news was, however, I couldn't invent anything useful. I wish I had other talents and had foreseen the internet or was born in Silicon Valley. I wasn't. I was born in the Black Forest, basically. So I had to settle for second or third best. Came across Warren Buffett, didn't know anything about investing, but understood one key aspect, that if you can generate and sustain high investment returns for a long period of time, you don't need to start with very much. Compounding. So that suited me very well. I had no money, lots of time. And so I made it a one-dimensional problem just to figure out how to generate and sustain high investment returns for a long period of time. So I went down the value investing rabbit hole, got very lucky, got a full scholarship to study at the London School of Economics, LSE. I'd never really been to England. And, I was fortunate that I was sponsored by a Greek Cypriot airline billionaire, Sir Stelios Hadjianou, the founder of EasyJet.
How did he sponsor you, Stelios?
Well, he was an LSE
for people who don't know, he's kind of a legend in the UK because he started EasyJet, which is like...
Correct. I always joke I'm a curious case where the Greek was paying for the German. I've reminded him we've returned the favor. No, but he was a graduate from the LSE, and he had come from this shipping family, so he had a bit of seed capital to start an airline as a young whippersnapper, and it worked. And the rest is history, as they say. Yeah. And so being in London during these formative years gave me, so the ability to follow my passion, interest in, business, entrepreneurship, investing, not only in theory, by reading it all, keep that up to this day, but in practice, working with and for practitioners. And that's what I did basically every, summer and every 3 minute in between. So did a bunch of internships in what we now call traditional finance, investment banking at Rothschilds, 2 summers in private equity, one at Fortress, one at Blackstone. My entire second year, actually, I worked for a long-short equity fund called AKO Capital, run by a Norwegian, Nikolai, who now runs the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, the world's largest, I guess. And then I went to Goldman Sachs for my sins, I guess the
We
key
all
with gold.
we all sinned at Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, well, I learned the key with Goldman is to get more out of the firm than they get out of you. I met my wife at Goldman in a job interview, so we both can claim success, I guess. But I was an entrepreneur, so basically, I
What were you doing at Goldman, by the way?
well, I was not in the banking side, but the internal, for lack of a better word, hedge fund called Goldman Sachs Investment Partners, GSIP, which was the latest incarnation of the proprietary equity investing business that Goldman had, very successfully built since the 80s, really.
Yeah.
And I had a humble start to this business, and I signed my contract late 2007. This was, Goldman was on top of the world, as you remember. This was the A team, SEAL Team 6. I had arrived. 9 months later, we almost went bust. Wasn't my fault, but yeah, it's the market is a harsh mistress, and it's a humble business, and it's good that you're getting humbled early in your career. So that's definitely what happened to me. And the long story short is then I got pregnant with starting my own business. It's called Kingsway Capital. We are we're crazy enough to invest in what we call frontier and emerging markets. Maybe you're the global leader in this space. So we have both public equities, and then we have early and growth stage venture, and we've always had problems with the currencies. And so sadly, I'm a late convert, so I only got basically into first Bitcoin, then crypto, sort of 2019-20, and then COVID happened, and the money printer went burr, and I saw for the first time stuff happening to the dollar that I was worried about and very familiar with, given my emerging market experience, and this is basically how we got into this space. And then we realized in emerging markets, right, there's 3 billion people or so who are basically unbanked or underbanked, and they don't have the US dollar, right? They have the Zimbabwean dollar. I got 100 trillion, right? Nikolai from Norway, 1.4 trillion or so. This is 100, right? One of a billion noids. The struggle is real. But now these people have smartphones, and guess what? They're using smartphones to get out of, this into US dollar stablecoin, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, Sui, Toncoin. Everything is better than this, right? The bar is pretty low. And we're seeing not only local or regional, but kind of global winners emerge that scale in these countries first. The crypto penetration in Nigeria or Vietnam will be 40+% and growing. And, those global winners, and TON is a good example, are at least historically unlikely to have a giant Chinese or US competitor. That might change now as the superpowers used to have teething issues with blockchain. And we often find them also well ahead of Silicon Valley, as Silicon Valley is not looking in the Philippines or in Africa, right? And so that's how I got into TON, first as an investor, became the biggest investor in TON, joined the foundation board, and since inception, basically in 23. So that was just over 2 years ago. And then I was asked to become president. And it was like a George Washington kind of situation. I had other options in life. And as you know, George Washington did not want to become United States president. He had to be asked a couple of times. And then it was clear it was sort of a TINA situation. There's no alternative. And I'm doing it pro bono. I don't take any compensation from the foundation. But I'm here basically to, help with strategy and then talent, bringing in the team, the executive leadership, and then to execute on the strategy, which I'm happy to go into.
Hi, Raoul here. Listen, I think we've got until 2030 before the economic singularity arrives. Now, it might not be the exact date, but it's around then. So we have about 6 years to figure out how to unfuck our future. I've put together a report to help you called Prepare for 2030. It's going to help you take the first steps in that journey to make sure you're secure past 2030. So just click on the link below and start your journey now. I just want to go back a little bit to Kingsway because it's a great story in itself. Tell me about Kingsway. You started up, you came out of Goldman.
Yeah.
You have to raise capital, build this business.
Yeah.
And what's in your head? Frontier markets.
Yeah, basically. I was basically pregnant with with I guess 2 big ideas, and this was again my Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, traditional finance, chapter. The number one was, instead of being an acrobat, right? And I know you have been a very talented macro trader. I find it very difficult. I'm a very simple mind. I thought it's much easier to buy the very, very best businesses, let them compound for a long period of time and basically get out of the way. And And of course, you can do that in the sort of US and Western capital markets, but there's so much competition, and these the market's pretty efficient. Had you done this in emerging markets like India 20 years ago, you could have done really, really well. And so I looked at Bangladesh and Pakistan and parts of Africa, Southeast Asia, LATAM, and so forth, and there was basically no competition. And my it was a big dream. My seed capital came from fools, friends, and family, mostly fools and friends, typically other hedge fund and private equity folks who invested in personal capacity. And then we were very lucky to partner with a handful of US endowments and foundations, institutional family offices. So I guess the lesson was, my biggest day one investor was a gentleman called Howard Marks, the founder of Oak Tree Capital, who basically told me, Manny, if you want to win any game, sports or investing, you have to be a good athlete. And you're a pretty good athlete here, but there's so many others. Just as important, maybe more important than being a good athlete, you have to choose a game that's stacked in your favor and avoid the competition. And so that's kind of the big fish in small pond, the road less traveled. And I was like 27. So, and then ran into the machine gun fire of these frontier and emerging market currencies. The Nigerian naira was like 100 to the dollar. Now it's 1,000 or probably worse. And that's why I got into.
Were you investing in mainly public markets or
yes,
private as well?
Initially public markets. These stock markets over there, of course, exist. They're pretty small, pretty liquid, but if we're buying high quality consumer goods companies from breweries or biscuit companies and so forth. And then we also predicted that there will be sort of consumer internet opportunity. But keep in mind, like, in 2013 or so, there were like 80 smartphones in like Bangladesh, Egypt, or Pakistan each. Now there's 80 million each. So we had the right instincts. But we started a sort of pilot venture fund around 2015, 16. And then that led us to success in sort of traditional growth companies, like, property classifieds is one example, then fintech, and then digital assets.
So to me, there's a lot of relevancy by what you did in Kingsway. One of it is like, it is not easy to invest in Pakistan or Bangladesh. Just, you can't buy it on your phone, right? So market access is something you learn, complicated market access. How the fuck do I do this? Often in weird instruments because there's no other way of doing it for FDI reasons.
Yes.
Then you're dealing with, as you say, currencies that are complicated and economies and governments that are complemented, that rug pull you all the time, that things happen.
Yes.
And then you've got this thing that you're dealing with small growing economies that are trying to learn as they grow. And to me, that is the entire crypto world. How difficult is it to get market access?
Crypto is the frontier market.
It's a frontier market. It's all, and I've written a lot of pieces about this, is how I think about the crypto economy and the sub-economies within it. They're all frontier markets. Right. Some are larger than others. So we call them emerging markets plus frontier markets. We've got this problem of market access. We've got the same complications of governance. Yeah. We've got, all of the shit that you've gone through.
Exactly.
We complicate it because it's all digital and claim it's all different. It's not. It's the same stuff. It's building small economies and businesses in these highly volatile economies. That's what we're doing.
Absolutely right. And I guess you put it really well. I mean, this is maybe, what did Elon say? In hindsight, it was inevitable that I would end up in digital assets, given, that this is just a logical extension almost. But also, frankly, I'm really mission driven about this as well. Like, I've seen a lot of poverty in my life. Sadly, this is not a joke. Like, this is a human rights problem. I was at the Oslo Freedom Forum last week. Actually, Pavel Durov gave a very passionate speech or interview that is online. And, I've come to the conclusion, right, that people aren't poor in these countries because they're lazy or stupid. Because in my humble experience, most of them are not lazy or stupid, right? They're poor because they've only got labor working for them, not capital. And there never is any true capital formation because the little money they make from their labor, there's no place to put it other than fiat currency cash of the worst kind, not even interest. And so it's a pretty big deal that for the very first time in human history, the poorest people in the world can choose and are choosing the same stores of value in cyberspace that the richest people in the world are choosing. So starting with the US dollar, stablecoins, massively popular. But, of course, Bitcoin, and then you go down the list, right? And so that is new and it could make a massive dent in the poverty reduction, financial inclusion, economic empowerment, and I'm here for it.
And also, the story you followed in the emerging markets and the frontier markets, and we saw it probably at best in Kenya, maybe, was this fintech plus digitization plus mobile phone revolution. I mean, India went from 200 million mobile phones to entire 100% of the population with almost free data. I mean, crazy stuff happened. And the next part of that story is obviously the crypto story. It's kind of, as you say, in hindsight, it was fucking obvious.
Yes, absolutely right. I mean, it's called leapfrogging. I mean, Kenya is a good case study. There's something called M-Pesa, which is Safaricom. So that's a subsidiary of Vodafone. And, when they did their business plan in, I don't know, I think 2005 or so, to say, hey, we will have maybe 500,000 users in like 10 years from now. They had like 45 million, the whole country. Like, it's every bartender, and this is not smartphone, and this is Nokia brick, like dumb phones, would outdo any, like, you and me in like paying their peers and paying their utility bills or, on a Nokia phone, right? And but of course, it's all shilling, right? And the shilling against the dollar, you can do the math, and then the dollar against BTC or ETH or Solana or TON is like, you see where this is going, right?
The other thing that is interesting, again, I love to draw parallels because people think everything we're doing is new and it's not, is you saw the adoption of, let's say, fintech. M-Pesa is a great example, right? I don't know what the population of Kenya is. 100
like
million?
45 million.
45 million.
Yeah,
okay, so 45 million went from 0 to 45 million people, essentially, right?
Yes.
So what you have is a network, which is a country, a state, and you apply a new method of finance, and what you saw was network adoption. And what we've got here, what you're looking at with Telegram, is there is a network state of about 1 billion people. It's a globalized network state. It doesn't have a system of money. Well, it does now. Or a system of finance, whatever. Let's not necessarily call it money. Let's call it a financial platform, ability for everybody to build and do what on top of it. It's, again, the same playbook. People just complicate it. It's all it is.
Yeah, although I would add, Raoul, that I might be the only person in the world who says Balaji doesn't take it far enough. He wrote the network state. I'll raise him the network continent. In my mind, what Satoshi discovered with, first Bitcoin and then, of course, the whole blockchain industry is not just digital scarcity or absolute scarcity. It's a new continent in cyberspace, America in cyberspace, right? And I call this continent Satorica. Now, if you don't know and your listeners don't know why America is called America, I can tell you that story. It comes back from to my hometown in Black Forest, Germany. So, many of your listeners will probably know that America was named in honor of Amerigo Vespucci, the Italian explorer from Florence. And that much is true. But, Vespucci was a European gentleman like your good self. So he wasn't so full of himself to name it himself after himself, right? Now, who named America? Good question. The answer is a random German cartographer from my village. His basically German name is Martin Waldseemüller, the Latin name Hyla Cumulus, which, I shouldn't dox myself, but anyway, you can see where this is going. And he wasn't very special, but he did make the map, the first one. I've got I don't want to move the camera, but I have it here and you can just Google it. And he asked the question in 1507, what should we call this place? Now, who found it? Amerigo found it. Not even true. Doesn't matter. This is why America is called America, right? And the point, of course, is that the idea of America came from this country here in the UK. John Locke, life, liberty, property. That became life, liberty, in the pursuit of happiness. Now, let's go through the list, right? This is digital property. Even the IRS agrees to this by now. Clearly, it's liberty and it's freedom. And I argue it gives life and hope to people who neither have liberty nor property. By the people, for the people, from the people. So we're all in the Mayflower right now, and without having to leave our physical location. And of course, I would argue that the discovery of America, was a pretty big deal in the arc of history. From a cotton colony, it became basically first global, economic superpower, global reserve currency, and there is I think a need for having the United States of Satorica. The US needs to be on board, and now it is. As Winston Churchill was right, America will always do the right thing, but only after all other options are exhausted. And here we are.
And, I've thought about this. I refer to it as like fiat world and crypto land. And this is the new promised world, and that we are, and I've used the same thing. We're migrating across to this new world where there's higher returns on capital, more personal freedom, and all of the things that make nations great. And we've created this digital, I think, continent, maybe a digital world of which we can migrate across to. And that slow thing, I even think about things like how I've thought about it, stuff like, okay, we can go and live in crypto land, which we do because we keep our savings and do our purchases and whatever. But things like, I think of the ETFs as like FDI. So you're taking money direct from fiat world, but it's still linked to fiat world. So it's kind of hot money flows. FDI is VC. It's the same model of a globalized economy. It just happens to be the fastest growing economy the world has ever seen. And as you rightly say, it's made up of sub-nation states. So, of which Bitcoin is the largest and Ethereum is the second largest. And then, there's other fast growing nations, and some will not make it and some will make it. And it's the rise and fall of nations going on.
Absolutely, yeah. And of course, this is not too dissimilar when America was discovered, and there's different countries. And, it wasn't clear that, North America was going to be so much more successful than South America, for instance,
no.
From a resource endowment perspective and so forth. And arguably, again, I'm a history buff, so I don't want to, sidetrack the conversation too much. But I think this is a very apt analogy, and I think this is I see the development of this industry in that sort of line of ideas.
So I want to go back to 2020 and your Bitcoin story, and then I want to know how it morphed into a TON story. So I want to hear this.
Sure. Yeah, as I said, I mean, I've probably heard about Bitcoin first in 2015, 16. I have a younger partner who is much more, clever than I am. He's been, I think, in Bitcoin since 2012 and runs a full node and a home miner, and he's been pounding the table. But, I was like, I was super busy running the business and traveling the world and, raising capital and, dealing with all the problems that we've talked about. But frankly, I didn't take it seriously. I was like, what? Magic beans, magic internet money. I was at Goldman Sachs, I was like,
I'm a value investor, for God's sake.
Yeah. And the reality is that's the natural reaction, right? Because humans, whether we like it or not, we are quite judgmental creatures in a way. We have to judge, right? Because is it dangerous? Is it safe? Is it good? Like, is it tiger? No. And of course, everyone judges. I mean, in my experience, at least, certainly people with my background, that oh my God, this doesn't sound right? And then what's happening is when you encounter it again and again, and you at some point, of course, realize you haven't really thought about it at all. Carl Jung, the German psychoanalyst, said, most thinking is hard. That's why most people don't do it, and they judge, right? And you have to admit to yourself that you were wrong judging it the first time around, and that takes humility. And humility is in dramatically short supply in the financial profession and beyond, right? And so once I realized what this is, right, and read the Bitcoin Standard and went to Bet with Bitcoin podcasts, and and of course I had again this experience with these frontier emerging market currencies. I said this is at least a decent part of the solution, and we want to express this with our institutional capital. And we started with Bitcoin mining. Like, it's a very, I mean, in the bull market it works, but it's a tough business. So, and then we branched out into other Bitcoin lending and some of the Lightning related companies. And then we branched out outside of the Bitcoin ecosystem. And look, I'm not a maximalist. I think the case for maximalism, I think, is reasonably strong. Like, Buffett is a fundamentalist on never selling a great business. But I'm not a fundamentalist. And then I got interested in blockchain gaming, for instance. So we became the largest shareholder of a company called Animoca. I think Yat's been on your show.
I saw Yat at dinner with him in Dubai the other day.
And that picked up in the Philippines, as you remember, in the summer of 21. So we saw that early, and then got in early. Luckily, it hasn't been, blockchain gaming hasn't fully lived up to its promise. But I've no shadow of doubt in my mind. Like, Roblox is a great example. Of course, that's not on chain, but you could easily see that will become on chain. And it just takes a while to put together AAA games that are not just having a sort of economic component, but also really good fun and competitive on a global level. And that's happening. We then, when the sort of cycle turned, we got involved in a company called blockchain.com. So that was an unusual investment for us, and it was a bit more later stage, but there was a sort of balance sheet, when the cycle turned, basically repairment required. So we got involved there, and
they're good friends of mine as well, those guys.
Yeah, they're I think the third biggest surviving of the three original OG Western crypto companies after Coinbase and Kraken. And then we got introduced to TON, and then the rest. I mean, I'm happy to of course go into a lot more detail there.
Yeah. So you see TON. What is interesting because of the size of the network that exists? What is it that you're thinking about when you see TON as an investment? We'll talk about the foundation as we go, but let's start with the investment thesis you saw.
Right. I mean, first of all, in my mind, it always starts with the people, right? The founder, the jockey, the team, right? And I would say credit where credit is due. Pavel Durov arguably is the GOAT, the greatest of all time in his particular domain. In tennis, you can debate, is it Federer, is it Djokovic, Alcaraz, right? But I think in messaging, social media at large, the debate is settled, right? How many founders walk the face of the earth, right? That have built an app that 1 billion people use every month? You could name a handful. And, but then how many of those are owned 100% by one person? There's only one. So Pavel is the only living human being that has basically achieved this without, $1 of marketing spend or $1 of equity dilution. And he's a very intense, talented, sort of Elon level type founder, in my humble opinion, who also hasn't sold his soul and sacrificed his principles. And he's paying a pretty big price for this. Meta today has 400 product managers. Zuckerberg ain't one of them. Telegram's got one product manager, and it's Pavel, right? And he doesn't even drink caffeine, let alone alcohol. Like, he's on a mission. And the team is 30 core engineers or so. That's like the bulls in the 90s sort of thing, right? And then his brothers may be even smarter. Granted, I haven't met his brother, and I probably couldn't hold a conversation with that man. But he is Nikolai Durov, the perhaps world's best mathematician, computer scientist, and cryptographer of that generation, at least, right? And he's basically at age 8, he was solving cubic equations live on TV in his head, which the math community thought was impossible. My 8-year-old daughter's into horseback riding. And, I'm reasonably smart. I don't know what a cubic equation is, truly. And then he won the global math and CS Olympiads, 2 times in a row, and that's the maximum amount you can do them. And he's the technical sort of engineering brain, while Pavel is product. And he's designed the backbone for their first business, VK, then Telegram, where it's the CTO, and TON Coin, where Nikolai is the author of the white paper. At least that's the rumor. And so I mean, that's, I think, a really interesting combination. And then, of course, you're sitting on a messaging app with a 1 billion users, right? And in my opinion, all these blockchains have basically a chicken and egg problem, right? Why would anyone use Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, or Sui, or Toncoin if no one else uses it, right? So you have to have these adoption waves and the diehard community, and it takes a while and a few cycles. Classic chicken and egg. Now we have a chicken called Telegram. Can we lay the egg? That is the question, right? But I think we can. And another quote that comes to mind is, there's a very famous phrase from Bill Gates, who said in the late 90s when the internet came first about, and Yat keeps repeating that to me, content is king, right? Content is king. And of course, who am I to disagree with Bill Gates in the late 90s? I also believe that content is king, but distribution is the queen, and she's wearing the pants. At least in my household, the point is you want the content and the distribution. And in the age of AI, I think the content is more at risk of being commoditized relative to the distribution.
And so here what we've got is you've got a network state, and you're now trying to get the adoption of a new technology within the network state, which is that whole thing about Kenya. There's 45 million people. Can you get them to adopt it? Now, I think this is why TON to me is so fascinating, because everybody else has done it the other way around.
Right.
And this is this way around, right? Yet to be proven, but there's a clear thesis, which makes sense. The only people who ever tried it before got shut down by every government on earth, and that was the DM project at Facebook.
Right.
I'm on the foundation, as you know, of Sui, which is that team, because they couldn't do it at Facebook because it got shut down. Yeah. So this is the big experiment to me. This is fascinating.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, this is, as you say, it could be $1 trillion idea, right? But, don't take my word for this. Take Zuckerberg, right? Last time I checked, $1.8 trillion market cap. Hard to move your needle at this point. He thought this could, right? And for me, the other really important analogy is actually in the East, Tencent, China. How did Tencent become a $1 trillion enterprise at that time? Asia's most valuable corporation, right? You had basically WeChat in the middle, the messenger, that then became what we now call basically, for lack of a better word, super app. And we don't have the super app in the West. Imagine, in one app, in this case, WeChat, you not only have your messenger, but you have your Uber, your Amazon, your Spotify, and everything else, including all the banking, granted no blockchain, in one app, and then the gaming, right? So I think this is really the analogy, and Tencent was a spectacular investment. I mean, there's my old friend Zhang Lei from Hill House. He put money into Tencent in the 2005 or so contest. Didn't keep all of it, but the rest is history. And Naspers, now Prosus, a legacy media company from beautiful Cape Town, South Africa. I think they put something like 30 million into Tencent around the same time, and they kept most of it, and that became a 6,000x or something like that. Now, it took 15 years, granted, right? But my point is, so never in the and I was modestly, of course, successful perhaps, and before I got into crypto at all, into TON, but never in the history of actually my career have I seen the stars align in this constellation. You got such a world-class proven team, like Elon level founders. And of course, the team around, the engineers around them, I can, name a few more names, but let's just say they've done it once with VK, twice with Telegram. Can they do it again? I think so. With such an unfair competitive advantage, if you own a messenger, it's not really a fair fight. Going after what could be a $1 trillion prize, and we still cut very, very early in the journey, right? And again, it's no longer a fringe view. I mean, we announced last quarter, backing by our friends from Silicon Valley. So there's been a press release with, Sequoia, Benchmark, Ribbit, and others. Pantera, I think Dan has been on your show. And
Mickey Malka's a good friend of mine as well.
Yeah, Mickey's been terrific, of course. He's been, again, Venezuela 2010.
He understands the game.
For sure. And Ben says, this is not a coincidence, right?
No, Wences as well, yeah.
Yeah.
And
so go ahead.
Because the other person is going to walk into this space clearly. Well, it's clear that Meta will do something, but maybe it's a stable coin. Let's see. It's what Elon does is going to be interesting, because he does have a network and he's trying to create a super app, and finance is a big part of what he's aiming at. So that'll be interesting. And you guys have or Telegram has partly partnered with him to be able to use the AI on Telegram. So it's interesting. Yeah,
so just on that, I think you're absolutely right. Like, it's going to be very curious to see what Zuckerberg and Meta end up doing. The announcement is clearly that they're going back in. I think they're, like Elon, more focused on AI right now, unsurprisingly. But, in your WhatsApp now, you have the AI basically in your chat, right? So you can just ask it. And of course, everyone knows what's going on with Grok on X and OpenAI. But, it's interesting that, if you're Zuckerberg, you're not going to help any other layer one, any other stablecoin, or any other AI player. You're going to do it all yourself, right? So if you want access to the largest open distribution in the Western world, which is Telegram, you kind of got to talk to Pavel, right? And, whether it's Tether, which is a, big partner of TON already. We had at that point, the fastest launch of Tether ever last April, sort of from 0 to like $1 billion in I think 8 months. And of course, we are, very, very strong supporters of Tether, but, we'll also need to, of course, consider launching other stable coins. And we are also entering the US market, which we should touch on maybe next. And on the AI side, look, I mean, it was a bit unfortunate last week, and I can't, of course, speak on behalf of neither Pavel nor Telegram, but there was an announcement, and it was unfortunate that it was done sort of a little bit prematurely. And it is, true that it hasn't been signed yet, and you can read it all on X. But I would hope that cooler heads prevail, and then this is a partnership that can be done. And frankly, they probably need each other, right? In a way, right? I mean, the alliances are sort of forming, the AI wars are going cross-platform, and again, distribution is the queen, right? And Telegram has it.
So, what is your job now at the foundation? What are you trying to achieve? You've got the currency, it's launched, there's a network.
Yeah.
What is your job? How on earth are you going to get this across the line? How are you going to develop this ecosystem and economy for the next 10 years?
Well, it is my first digital nation, so first term, just over 100 days into the job.
We
But
call you King Manny now. Are you a dictator? A
not at
monarch?
all. No, no, no. By the people, for the people, from the people. I'm the president is office hours. You can again. I don't take any compensation. I'm doing this frankly for the greater good, for the mission, right? And again, it doesn't suit me, and of course, I need to manage my day to day as well, which is why I've brought in a strong team. So really, consider me just more like a chairman role, where of course the first 100 days were very active, but now we've defined a strategy, which I can talk about. We brought in the leadership team. We hired a CEO who's one of the co-founders of MoonPay, an old friend of mine, a German execution operator. He's sort of whipping this organization into shape, I would say. Good goalkeeper, clean slate. Like, Germans are the best goalkeeper nation in football, or soccer, as you call them. And of course, a lot of important people around him. And now we are fully in execution mode. And the priority number one is coming to the US. So TON has avoided the US under Biden-Harris, and maybe that was overly conservative. But Independence Day is near, so around the 4th of July, you can expect what I would call a sort of decisive market entry. What does that mean? For US users, you might not know this, but within the Telegram app, there is basically a wallet for non-US users in the settings menu. And we're going to basically lift the geo-block. It is currently geo-blocked and has been since inception for US users around the 4th of July. And Telegram, without stating so detailed numbers, but had over or just under 100 million downloads just in the US, just in iOS over the last 12 months, right? And as you might know, no one has actually won the messaging game proper in the US yet. There's tons of iMessage, tons of SMS. WhatsApp is big, but not as big as it is internationally. Yeah. And of course, there's Signal and Telegram. And so it's going to be really interesting. And then we, of course, are keen to list on all the relevant US spot exchanges, which is coming. I can't, of course, share too many details, but you can, of course, expect.
I mean, it's a big enough project. I mean, your FDV is very high. It's a big project, so.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, I would say it's of all the contenders for like $1 trillion protocols, and of course, TON is by no means the only one. Quite. I mean, of course, there's Bitcoin at 2 trillion, and Ethereum, I've peaked I think at 450 billion, and sort of had a bit of a speed bump. Hopefully, they're gonna reconnect with their identity, what capitalism looks like, and you can expect me as the TON Foundation president to be, let's say, commercial as the history of my career as an investor. And of course, I've been deeply impressed by Solana. They have executed, really well. And of course, in Sui and Aptos, there's lots of activity there, right? But of course, in every chain is a superpower, right? And we're not trying to imitate or frankly, even sort of compete with other chains. We think we want to grow the pie, right? We want to bring in hundreds of millions of users, ultimately billions of users. The first billion is the hardest in my humble experience, right? So Telegram is not stopping. We're at 1 billion. 2 billion, 3 billion, maybe more. That's the plan, right? And Pavel, of course, is the gloves are off. I mean, he's very, 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 very focused on this, right? And the key question we have is how do we basically convert the Telegram messaging user to a blockchain user at large, but of course specifically TON. And of course, we can do things that other chains just can't do, right? From a UI UX perspective. And so forth. And Telegram there's 10 million businesses on Telegram who effectively run their business on Telegram. Most of them are small, some are not that small. So there's like platforms like the bot platform, the ads platform, the mini app platform. And we can sort of just align the incentives here that basically benefits the whole industry at large, but of course specifically with a focus on driving adoption for TONcoin.
What is the vision for TON itself? What role does it play within the ecosystem? Is it the kind of infrastructure layer that things get built on top of and that generates the economic activity? Is it the loyalty layer? Is it the currency layer? What the fuck is it?
Well, I guess it's a bit like, the blind people touch an elephant, right? No, what I would say, if this is not the network state, but the network continent, if this is Saprica, the United States of Saprica, what Telegram is doing, right? It is basically freedom of speech, right? It is the free speech messaging platform that respects user privacy, and of course it's not a coincidence that that's the First Amendment in the U.S. Constitution, right? Now, what TON does is basically providing the property rights layer, basically the economic layer. right? And the mission in one sentence is putting freedom into orbit, right? Whether that's freedom of speech or freedom to transact, voluntary exchange, free markets, and of course also banking the unbanked in the end, right? And freedom isn't free. The mission has to be financed, right? We also, of course, compensating Telegram for the exclusivity that TON has with the messenger. And the point is putting freedom into orbit. I mean, it might sound a bit cheesy, but the difference of basically launching a rocket and reaching orbit. If you don't reach orbit, you come down. If you reach orbit, it stays there for 1,000 years, like forever, right? And I think this is, really important as a mission because, there's governments in authoritarian regimes that have other ideas, right? They want a central bank digital currency linked to a social credit score, linked to QR codes and digital IDs and sort of digital dystopia, right? And I'd much rather, I'm on team freedom, right? Much rather make sure that freedom prevails and the American idea is going to take us into the next, decades and centuries, and that's really what I'm here for, right? In terms of mission.
Yeah, but what do people use the TON coin for?
Right, of course.
What is it going to be used for over time? What's right. In your head? Obviously, you hope to be directionally right. Whatever you think it's going to be, it's not going to be that because that's how things develop. But what's in your head?
I mean, the list of real-world use cases, and I get this question a lot, and I was like, "What do you mean? Like, isn't it obvious?" Sort of is quite endless, right? I mean. For instance, of course, American users will know what Venmo is, right? You can Venmo each other. Like that basically works in Telegram today outside the US. It's coming to the US. You can just click your Telegram contact, press a button, and that person doesn't even need to have a wallet. You can still send him coins. And if they don't have a wallet yet, they just get a button, say click, and you deactivate a wallet and you get the coin, whether it's a TON coin or a US dollar stable coin that runs on TON, right? So, remittances is a, $1 trillion market, right? Payments, of course, is a lot bigger. And, what happens in China, basically, that every corner shop has a QR code, right, displayed, and you can just basically scan it and then transact, of course, online, but also offline. We talked about M-Pesa, right? There's a $1 trillion of what's called mobile money in the world. 80%, 800 billion of that sits in Africa, right? Again, and I think that will, as smartphone penetration in Africa rises and, Telegram is very popular. 80% of Telegram users sit in emerging and frontier markets. Of course, and they might want the dollar, right? They might not want the TON coin. They can also own Bitcoin or other, in the Custodied wallet, you can buy Sui as well in the Telegram wallet, right? We're the open network, right? We're trying to grow the pie for the whole industry. And then, of course, there's the wonderful world of, a sort of digital property rights, whether that's NFTs, gifts on Telegram we have got $3 million a day. It's not all on chain yet, granted, but, that's more than OpenSea. Like it's just Telegram gifts, right? Where you can, of course, who doesn't like gifts, right? Either gifting them or getting them, whether it's a Valentine's Day, a birthday, or Christmas, or whatever it is. And you can, put them on your profile now. And of course, some of them are rarer than others. And so that's a really interesting sort of real world use case. You've got, gaming, of course, we had last year, which of course is not where we end up, but where we started, the tapping game phenomenon, Notcoin, and then, Catison and dogs and hamster. And, you could basically prove the point, right? That you could add basically 1 or even 2 zeros compared to all the experiments, let's say, that have happened in blockchain gaming, in the prior cycle where, Axie Infinity, wonderful pioneers, but they peaked at 2.7 million monthly active users, right? And Notcoin, I think, had 40 million out of the gate, within weeks, right? This is very viral. And then the others were even bigger, like some of them in the low hundreds of millions. So of course, again, we need higher quality games. That's coming. And then you see influencers actually monetizing on Telegram with the help of AI, like US influencers, on their Instagram, right? A Meta property where the monetization is increasingly more difficult. They basically link their Telegram. You can hop in, you chat to them. It's, of course, AI. Right? It's an LLM that is trained on the influencer's tone of voice. And they have 1 million conversations in parallel with their fans. And then you can request sort of more unique sort of limited edition content. You have to pay, right? There's something called Telegram Stars, which I'm sure whether the audience is familiar, but that's basically a sort of in-app currency, not on chain, but half of all stars are bought with TON coin. And that, of course, also avoids the Apple and Google fees. And of course, now we had the Epic ruling, so that's a big positive for us. And currently, actually, half of stars are spent on gifts, unsurprisingly, perhaps, right? So I can go on, right? But there's
so is your focus therefore because sitting on the Sui Foundation, for example, our focus is finding people to partner with who want to build on. But you don't need to do that so much as say, we've got a network. So if you're coming to our network to do stuff, we've got this new amazing tool of which you can do things with. It's kind of somewhat different. You're not going to Germany and say, why don't you put your driving licenses on TON? What you're doing is saying, listen, we've got this massive network, come and build stuff here.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, we're trying to be less sort of convincing by dishing out grants and spending a lot of money to acquire users. Quite the opposite. We are saying, look, plug in here, and we can add a 0 or 2 to your user base, right? And so and of course the commercial terms, we have done grants, we'll do grants in the future, but we want to focus on the big stuff, the stuff that really moves the needle. There's a million things to do, and there's like 5 things that matter. Well, let's get those right. So the strategy is called focus, right? US market entry. Clearly, that's a big one, right? As you know, the US is 70% of all, global capital markets and equities and stuff like that, right? We're not even in the US proper yet at all. That's coming, right? And doubling down on stablecoins, right? I mean, stablecoins is one of the largest and most exciting parts of this industry. Huge TAM, massive network effect. Tether's making more money than Goldman Sachs with considerable less people. And the U.S. government wants it, right? And who's going to buy the U.S. bonds? It's not going to be the Chinese, the Russians, the Saudis, or even the Japanese. It's going to be Tether and Circle, which hopefully is going to go public this week. And of course, it's faster, cheaper, 24/7. You can take self-custody, a wonderful innovation, right? And so what we're doing is the big stuff. Stablecoins is definitely in that category. Gaming will be in that category. Platform monetization will be in that category. And then we've got some blanks to fill. We're not properly in Korea yet. We're not on Upbit, So hopefully that will come. And so we're quite early, actually, right? And we also haven't really told the story well enough, and we want to also tell the story really well to the developers, right? So maybe this is another call. Hopefully you have developers in your audience, but you can build on Telegram, on TON, and you can monetize. And of course, the world's best Web3 developers tend to sit in the US, right? And we're just coming into that market.
I think you'll find just because of Telegram is a unique thing, people will build different use cases than we've seen yet use elsewhere. And I think that's going to be fascinating. What people think of is like, how do I build things for the network? We saw what got built on top of Telegram already, and what's been built on top of Facebook, these kind of closed networks. Really different stuff can be built.
Yeah, and like we were starting with the basics, right? Like almost like a Revolut type experience on Telegram, just default global, right? Where you can have a dollar account. Let's give it to them, whether that's a Tether or Circle or USD1 or something like that. Paxos could be interesting because they share the yield. And then a dollar with a yield, right? I call it the digital money market fund. Again, I think the best comparison is again China, Tencent and Alibaba. When they launched the digital money market fund, one of them was called leftover treasure, where Chinese, you sweep it in from your checking account into your yield account. They went to 100 billion each, like in no time, right? Bigger than the, I think, JP Morgan Prime money market fund at that time, right? So we just launched Athena. Right. And of course, real world assets is another big topic, right? Telegram has $1.7 billion of convertible bonds. They just refinanced them last week. And we're trying to put also that on chain, right? So we have a captive issuer. So, and of course, it would be nice if that yield stays within the ecosystem and doesn't leak out to traditional finance, but stays in the country, in the network stays in the network continent, right? And then, we launched Tether Gold. My respect for gold has grown a lot since I've gone down the rabbit hole here of Bitcoin and crypto, right? And of course, gold has done very well, might continue to do very well. And so now, in emerging markets, as gold, the problem is, to get the LME, whatever it is, $3,300 an ounce, you need to be rich, right? If you're like a poor person in Africa, or in India, you might get jewelry, but, half of the, I've got not even an ounce of gold on my wedding band here, but half the cost of that item, of any jewelry item also, will be the craftsmanship and so forth. And now you can own a fraction of gold in your Telegram wallet sitting in Nigeria.
If you think about India has capital constraints, so they've been on and off with crypto. They'll get there eventually, on and off. An easy way of getting India into crypto is just by putting gold on chain.
For sure, yeah. And, that's something we actually launched, I think, yesterday. For one of the Tether Gold. And then what we can do now, and I don't want to steal too many thunder on the product side, but you can combine gifts with gold, right? You can actually have a a watch that is an NFT that is actually linked to an amount of gold that sits on chain and you can redeem and so forth. There's cool stuff. And so the design space is just a different, right? And look, I love crypto, right? But do I want to have a bunch of seed phrases flying around everywhere and have a MetaMask wallet and bridge to this chain and pay gas fees? And I want to press buttons and expect it to work. The way I use the internet. If I use the internet, or my mother, which she doesn't know which protocol is running in the background. Is it, HTTP, TCP/IP? Is it Linux? No, you press buttons and it works, right? You hop into your Telegram, now link to your wallet, connected to 1 billion people, growing, right? You hop into a game, link to your wallet. And then you have the AI in there as well, right? So my point is, like, this is just I think a whole another ecosystem basically that if we can't bring in hundreds of millions of people, I'm not sure anyone can, right? And so
but I'm going to ask you the boomer question now, because I use Telegram every day.
Yeah,
I don't know where the fuck any of these applications are. I just message people. Yeah, I've got my wallet because you sent me some TON a long time ago. I don't know where anything else is. Where do I find the games? Where do I find any of this? Where do I find payment rails? How do I send you anything? It's so not obvious from that screen.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there's Rome wasn't built in a day, right? And I would say again, I'm not happy with how, let's say, confusing some of the stuff looks.
I just can't find it. I don't even know how to get
discovery. Discovery is a topic, right? But look, I've got full confidence that we can fix these things. And the challenge, is also there's, of course, it's a global product, right? In the sense that in Asia, again, and of course China's not the only one, but you have super apps in Korea, for instance, and to some extent in Japan. So we need to build for an audience that is not just a Western audience, right? Actually, quite the opposite. The majority of Telegram users, 80% or so, sit in these frontier and emerging markets, right? But look, there's a lot of room for improvement. We're working hard on it, and we take the feedback on board and very seriously. And I would expect major sort of step changes in the sort of UI UX over the next months, quarters, and of course years.
Yeah, because as it moves away from being a messaging app, I know it's a lot more than that, but you kind of have to know how to do it. But correct, sooner or later, it should become an easier experience, and then that will just help what you're trying to do at the foundation level, which is your job is to grow the ecosystem.
Correct.
And that's from my perspective as a friend of yours, I would say the hardest thing is that UX part and UI, sure, because you have to know what you're doing. If not, you don't see it.
Absolutely, and frankly, also there's this, since we're having sort of a friendly conversation about this, there comes, it's not like sort of Dutch disease, but because we have all this like distribution power, there is sometimes, I think, a risk that you have a bit that complacency kicks in, right? Sort of, oh, we are Telegram, it's already like over, and we haven't done it yet. We haven't, it's a bit like the old Sequoia, like take down the posters, right? Like it's day one, like and to win a Formula One race, it's not about the absolute speed, but the relative speed to someone else. The other guys are hungry and they're accelerating, right? So we need to do that too, right? And so yeah, so definitely there's with all humility, like we haven't yet fully executed on this, but we have over the next 18 months we're gonna give it our real best shot and gonna go super hard at this. And I think
it hasn't been going that long. How long's it been launched for? 2 years?
So it's been more like sort of 3-4 years, but the official, let's say, partnership with Telegram was first announced in late 23. So that's 18 months ago, frankly.
Yeah.
And what happened since, we had basically Pavel Durov on stage for the first time last year, Token 2049, launching USDT, well executed. We had this tapping game phenomenon, and we had the ads platform being put on TON rails, right? And we had a very good momentum last year. TON went from $2 to $8 by this time last year, roughly, or certainly last summer. And then we had a bit of a curveball in Paris. Happy to talk about that too. But
I want to talk a little bit about that. There is a perceived geopolitical risk with Telegram because it's various partly Russian connections, stuff like that. And this world is still, us versus them, whatever it is. We're seeing that bifurcation.
Yes.
How do we deal with that? If it's a global app.
Yeah. No,
how do we deal with the perceived fear that the US suddenly wakes up angry or Europe wakes up angry and before you know it, everybody's shut down?
I mean, the US is actually not a problem, but the key question is, Raoul, whether the famous Winston Churchill quote also applies to Europe. Will Europe will always do the right thing, but only after all other options have been exhausted. And I'm not so sure. Speaking as a European, it's not our proudest
It
move.
was on my list of questions to ask you. It was, I have no idea what Europe's doing within all of this. But anyway, talk me through that geopolitical side,
Sure.
because you guys have lived it because of what happened to.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, of course, I mentioned the biography of Pavel, but what people need to understand is that their first business, VK, was and still is the single biggest social network in Europe, if you count Russia into Europe, which it used to be. And for me, the interesting story about VK was that unlike China, which was so firewalled, right? Neither Facebook or WhatsApp could have entered China and competed. Europe, including Russia, were open. So Facebook came, WhatsApp came, WeChat came in the end. And in most places, I'm from Germany, especially the US players just ended up bulldozing the local competition, despite the locals being actually really well funded and had the whole local VC and media landscape behind them. The network effects were too strong, but not in sort of Russia and Eastern Europe and sort of former Soviet Union states where the Durov brothers basically crushed Facebook and WhatsApp and won the market. Of course, they had home turf advantage, granted, but there was no regulatory like sort of firewall or reason like there was in China. So these guys are good. That did not happen in a lot of places. So good that the business got big. They had 100 million users 15 years ago. So big that the government got interested and eventually too interested, right? So, and there's a whole Tucker Carlson interview that Pavel gave last year. But basically what happened is the FSB came knocking, right, 15 years ago and said, oh, all this user data, give it to us. Oh, the opposition, we don't like them. Shut all this stuff down. Ukrainians, no. And not only did Pavel Durov not comply with this stuff, even further, he published it. He sort of made fun of it almost, and of course, that had consequences with a picture of a dog saying, I'm not your lapdog, Mr. Putin, right? And if you want to get out alive, so this guy's got balls of steel, but also to a fault, right?
I mean, there's one person you don't fuck with on a personal level, and that's Putin, because you just...
Correct.
I mean, I don't know how you protect yourself.
No, look, and this is actually when Telegram was born, right? So in this, his apartment got raided and like literally SWAT teams and everything was surveilled. And at this moment, he had no basically safe way to communicate online with his genius brother because they were everything was tapped, right? And so that's when the idea of Telegram was born. And so basically they eventually sort of folded, just sold their stake and they got a raw deal there, but not the end of the story, took their money, left the country, ended up in Dubai, and bought a bunch of Bitcoin early. That stretched, of course. So Bitcoin is actually the reason that Telegram has been independently financed for such a long time.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so Pavel owes a great debt, and I think the world owes a great debt for Bitcoins. He went in, I think, 2012, 2013, something like that. And he had a big exit, of course. Relatively speaking, I think he had a $300 million exit, so roughly 13, 14 years ago. And then so Telegram is now definitely an app of geopolitical interest, let's say. And of course, he is someone who left the country where he was born. And keep in mind, he was born in the Soviet Union, and sort of he saw the two systems. He lived in Italy as a 5-year-old, and he talks about all that in the Oslo interview. It's quite interesting. So he's on Team Freedom, right? And is paying a big price for this. And so he was asked last week, are you a Russian asset? And of course he said, look, I mean, I get quite annoyed when I get this question because I've, paid a huge price to basically, and there were, and we don't know whether it's the Russians or other states, but, there were attempts on his life, right? Sort of thing, right? And what happened then in France, he was basically accused that he should be held responsible for everything illegal happening on the platform, which is not a problem that exists in the US. In the US, the large tech companies fought and won the battle many moons ago that the user is ought to be held responsible. If I have an Apple iPhone, right, which I do, and if I were to do something illegal with that iPhone, which I won't, right, but if I did, Tim Cook wouldn't land in jail. Like I would get a problem, right, but not. And so. And in Europe, we don't have basically the First Amendment or these sort of grown-up, let's say, tested laws. And he's a suspect that, he should be held responsible for, whatever happens on Telegram, which is a tool, right? And of course, with 1 billion users, statistically speaking, you will have some bad apples, right? Luckily, they basically didn't find anything of substance. They went through everything and he got his travel ban lifted. So he's also in Dubai right now. but he still has to ask for permission, right? And it turns out now that actually the plot thickens, right? It's not just about, I don't know what the French said at the beginning, like, the child porn and stuff like this. It's geopolitical, right? Pavel just went on the record saying he was approached by, French intelligence and says, elections in Romania. Can you please shut down this, this, and this, and this? We are building a NATO base there, and we want this candidate to win. And of course, Telegram is not pro or against the other candidate. They have no position on this, but they're pro freedom of speech, right? And he went public with this, right? And it's not clear to me what the end game for the Europeans is. I mean, there's worse places to get stuck.
Deeply concerning is Europe. I mean, you're kind of losing entrepreneurs. Because
we're nowhere in AI, right? I mean, Germany, where I'm from, we don't have nuclear power. And the car industry is being decimated from either Tesla on the left and then the Chinese on the right. And the problem is the lack of leadership, like who's actually in charge. And this really is sort of the fourth turning in my mind, right? Where, the current generation of European leaders, and of course, I should, with all humility, say like, maybe I should be president or run for chancellor one day. But, I've decided to, build a digital nation. Like, and I think, my hope in Europe, is still, of course, full of talent and, has a history of turning things around. But it's not our proudest moment, to be fair.
And the UK's no better either.
Well, maybe the tallest midget, I would say, right? But that's not a high bar these days. I mean, I'm here, and I'm not leaving. But a lot of people have left recently with new tax changes, and it's not clear to me what the plan is. Well, frankly, I don't think they really have one, right? It's the honest answer.
No, and when you look at the largest, I still think the largest tech company in Europe is SAP, and that was built in 1980 something. I mean, that's staggering.
Yeah, absolutely. Like this is like there's dinosaurs, relatively speaking, right? And the cool thing, though, never in the history of capitalism, right, has $1 trillion tech outcome occurred outside of the US and China. And of course, I can't speak for Pavel, but certainly what could happen that this is it. I mean, Telegram, TON, and digital assets, right? So this is exciting, right? As also in terms of the scale and sort of impact that this can have on the free world.
I mean, fascinating, Manny. I can see why you gave up some of your very valuable time to join the foundation, because if you get this right, it's a big thing. It's a very big thing. It's a huge opportunity, fascinating, and I can't wait to see where you get to with this journey, because I think all eyes are on it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for giving me such a distinguished audience. Great fan of your show, and I hope we're entering the banana zone. So
we all do, my friend. Our hopes and dreams are in that fucking banana.
The path to greatness is never straight, right? And it's about not about the cards you're being dealt, but how you play the hand. And hopefully we're gonna play our hand really well. But look, we need all the help we can get. So please, thank you for giving us a platform. And happy to do this again in a couple of months' time. Of course, TON is open for business, coming to the US, and we're open for partnerships, and we want the industry to win, right? And to put freedom into orbit. So that's why we're doing this. So I really appreciate the time. And
fantastic. Well, good luck with everything.
Yeah, likewise. All the best, Raoul. Take care.
So I thought that was fascinating. I've been thinking for a long time that the crypto land and fiat world, and that crypto land is this new frontier emerging market that's growing, that's broken up into different nation states, whether it's Ethereum, whether it's Bitcoin, etc. And Manny's actually thinking in the same way, with that same framework of understanding. And really what he's thinking now is like, can Telegram and TON be like M-Pesa in Kenya? Fascinating way of thinking about it. And look, what's great about Manny is, he's obviously a lovely person, very engaging, very smart and thoughtful, but also very, he has a lot of humility with it as well. He understands the job at hand. So let's see where he goes on his journey to build out another network nation state.
Hey, thanks for sticking around to the end. Look, if you enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button and check out the video here on the right-hand side. I'm sure you'll enjoy that one as well. And if you're ready for more, go to realvision.com/join. I'll see you there.